Hello, I'm Matteo, the Chief Mobile Opinionist here at Tech Travel Geeks, and this is the Tech Travel Geeks side-by-side comparison of the POCO X3 NFC and the OnePlus N100. If you don't already, please do subscribe to the Tech Travel Geeks here on YouTube. Right then, so these are two of the most discussed devices on the internet in the latter part of 2020 and going into 2021. Both devices are priced around about £200 sterling and offer some pretty good specifications for the price. But we're going to walk them through side by side, and I'll give you my impressions of which one you should buy if you have that sort of budget for buying a smartphone. Both devices come from brands known for having slightly more powerful devices, but Xiaomi and their sub-brand POCO have been in this more value segment for quite a while, whereas OnePlus, this is the first year they've really moved into the lower price range of devices with the Nord series of devices, which the OnePlus N100 is part of. Now, the first thing to look at when you look at this class of smartphone is the screen. What are you getting for the money? Now, there is a difference in size. They're both LCD screens in this case, and that means they're liquid crystal displays, they're not AMOLED. The brightness isn't as high in direct sunlight and there's less contrast ratio. But the OnePlus N100 is an LCD display which is 6.5 inches in diagonal, and it's 720 pixels by 1600 pixels. So similar to what we saw on the Nokia 3.4, 5.4 and last year on the 5.3. Whereas the POCO X3 NFC offers a much higher resolution screen. It's 1080 pixels or 1080 pixels by 2400. So it is a full high definition display. So for example, if you're watching a cartoon like Archer in full high definition on the POCO X3 NFC, you'll get a higher resolution picture, whereas, for example, on the OnePlus N100, you'll have a sort of downscaled version. Now, to most people, that really won't make a very big difference, but it is a difference, especially in this value category, which may sway some users over others, especially for things like gaming and watching video, whether that's YouTube, and we hope you subscribe to and are watching Tech Travel Geeks videos on YouTube. We do offer most of them in 4K, but in that case, the OnePlus N100 wouldn't be as capable a device. So display-wise, that's the main difference between the two. The other minor one is that selfie camera. Both devices have dots, so you'll see that this one has a dot in the top left-hand corner of the screen, whereas the POCO X3 NFC has its dot in the middle, just as we saw on other Xiaomi devices in 2020, and more importantly, we saw on some Samsung devices. So it's a bit more of a symmetrical setup. It's better than a teardrop notch because you still have usable pixels around it, and it intrudes less on video. So that's the main difference in terms of screens. In my experience, the POCO X3 NFC had a much brighter screen when used in direct sunlight. And just to prove the point, we have the two screens here side by side. They're pretty much the same indoors, but the difference in direct sunlight, in my experience, the POCO X3 NFC just has a slightly better screen. Now, the screen's the main part. There's another thing to look at in the physical side of things, is where's the fingerprint scanner. So the OnePlus N100 has a nicely positioned ergonomic fingerprint scanner on the back of the device. This is my preferred solution. It's easy to find and it's tactile, as in you can find it quite easily just by running your finger over the back of the device. So I do like that, and it is very fast. This is a fast fingerprint scanner. Whereas the POCO X3 NFC has its fingerprint scanner embedded in the power button at the side of the device. This is a common design paradigm for POCO, Redmi and Xiaomi in 2020 and going into 2021. So it works, it's very fast, it's very responsive. I've had no issues with it. It's just slightly more complex for me personally to go and put my thumb or index finger on the fingerprint scanner on the side rather than on the back of the OnePlus N100. I just prefer that sort of user experience. So that's the main thing. The other one is just a minor thing. The volume rocker on the POCO X3 NFC is on the side here, whereas the OnePlus N100 has a power button there on the side and the volume rockers on the left, similar to what you have on, say, iPhones. But unlike other OnePlus devices, you don't have your silencer switch, which, if you're looking for a OnePlus experience, in my view, is one of the key elements of it. Right then, so we've covered the basic physical differences. Let's talk about what we have in terms of ports and availability. Both devices have pretty much everything that's important at the bottom. A speaker grill, a USB Type-C port for charging and for data, and a Courage port, that's a 3.5mm audio jack. Both devices have this, and I applaud them for keeping the Courage port alive well into 2021. At the top, there's one big difference. The OnePlus N100 just has a microphone hole, whereas the POCO X3 NFC also has an infrared blaster. Now this is something that allows you to remote control televisions, air conditioning units, blinds, any other device that has infrared as its command. And it's very, very useful when traveling. We are tech travel geeks here after all, so to me this is an important feature so that I don't always have to touch that grotty remote control that some hotels have. So that's a quick tour of the hardware, the differences. The POCO X3 NFC has a bigger screen, it feels like a heavier device to me, and overall I would say that it is in parts due to a slightly bigger battery. The declared battery size of the POCO X3 NFC is 5,160 mAh. That's a very high amount. Whereas the OnePlus N100 has a basic 5,000 mAh battery, which is great. Both devices have excellent battery life. Even if you're going to be using your devices heavily for things like gaming, watching video, video calling, messaging, making phone calls, both devices have really good battery life. And in my experience, both will get me through a day of heavy use in mixed Wi-Fi and 4G without any issues at all. Both devices have fast charging. The POCO X3 NFC has Xiaomi's new fast charging with 33 watts charging. So it is really, really fast and can charge the full battery in just over an hour. Whereas the OnePlus N100 has 18 watt charging. That's the same charging we see on the Pixel 4a, on the Pixel 5. It's not the fastest charging out there, but it is relatively fast, and you get that option. But bear in mind, it isn't the warp charging that you get on the bigger brothers of the OnePlus Nord, the actual OnePlus Nord we reviewed earlier in 2020, or the OnePlus 8 and 9 series of devices. So that's something really important to bear in mind. You do get fast charging, but it's not as fast as the bigger ones, whereas the POCO X3 NFC has that full fast charging. Okay, so on to the software. Now, both devices carry custom versions of Android, custom Android distributions, and both of them are relatively close to stock Android, or the Google Experience Android, in that they have a very straightforward user experience. Both of them, out of the box with their default launchers, have app drawers. So this is where, rather than have everything on your home screens, you can tidy away your icons into an app drawer where they are by default and only put the ones you want and need on your home screen. Apart from that, the rest of the menu systems are very, very similar. So you have quick action buttons at the top, you have access to your settings if you need them, and you have your full list of settings here. And you can see that the paradigm is very, very similar. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that they're running two different versions of Android. One is MIUI 12, that's on the POCO X3 NFC, Xiaomi's Android distribution. Whereas the OnePlus Nord N100 is using Oxygen OS, that's OnePlus's own Android distribution. So as you can see here from the About screen, there's a lot to take in. But the key thing is that they're both running Android 10, and they are both running a relatively recent security patch. Specifically, the POCO X3 NFC at the very beginning of February in 2021 is running the November security patch, whereas the OnePlus Nord N100, let's just check that, is running the December security patch, so just a month ahead. So you do get the OnePlus updates and security updates from OnePlus. They tend to be slightly faster than Xiaomi, but overall I would say they're pretty equivalent. Sometimes the MIUI devices are ahead, sometimes the OnePlus devices are ahead. So in terms of memory and storage, both devices are quite similar. So in the case of the POCO X3 NFC, I opted for the 128GB model, but there is also a 64GB model. Whereas on the OnePlus Nord N100, there's only one option, that's 64GB with 4GB of RAM. The POCO X3 NFC has 6GB of RAM. It is a bump up in terms of capability, but for most users that really won't make that much of a difference. So in terms of memory, as I've said, 64GB, 128GB, but there is a 64GB version of the POCO X3 NFC if you want to save some money. Both devices have expandable storage thanks to micro SD cards. So you can pop a micro SD card into both devices. As you can see, I have an extra 32GB in here, and the POCO X3 NFC has one as well. So honestly, both devices have plenty of storage built in and expandable storage for your music, videos, and any other content you want to go for. But what I would say is MIUI, especially in the user interface, is slightly better here, representing what you have on your devices better, in my opinion. But that's very, very personal in this case. In terms of connectivity, both devices are 4G devices. No excuse to play the 5G music video by Tech Travel Geeks here. It is a simple case of 4G, and that 4G is good. It saves battery compared to 5G, and in most cases you won't have 5G coverage where you live. So I would say that's not really a big issue. Both devices have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, but a key thing that the POCO X3 NFC has and that the OnePlus Nord N100 doesn't have is NFC. What is NFC? NFC is near field communication, the technology that allows you to use your smartphone to make payments using Android Pay. It's the technology that allows you to quickly pair Bluetooth speakers, earphones, maybe your car or other devices. So it is a noticeable difference in terms of what you can do with your smartphone. The POCO X3 NFC has NFC, and that's a really big difference. So that's the biggest factor that makes the Xiaomi POCO X3 NFC a device I would recommend over the OnePlus Nord N100. If you're not interested in using your smartphone for contactless payments, accessing public transit, or quick pairing with your devices, I would say maybe the OnePlus Nord N100 is for you. But the POCO X3 NFC has that out of the box. I would say that's definitely a a one-up for them. And it's not just there. The difference is also on the back. We'll look at the camera modules. The POCO X3 NFC suffers from what a lot of devices suffered from in 2020. This need to have cameras just to make the spec sheet look good. And in this case, you have a 64 megapixel main sensor, which is decent. I really like it. It's a good camera for its price range. It has an okay 13 megapixel ultra-wide sensor, and then it has two completely useless 2 megapixel sensors, one for macro use, which is terrible, and one as a depth sensor, which you could do without quite easily. The OnePlus N100 plays the same game, but in a much lower league. It has a 13 megapixel main sensor, which is decent, but nothing to shout out about. It then has a very similar 2 megapixel pointless macro sensor and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. So it has a passable 13 megapixel sensor, which in this price rate category would be acceptable, but everything else is pointless. And it is significantly inferior to the camera on the POCO X3 NFC. You can check out our sample pictures from the POCO X3 NFC in our full long-term review that we published a while back. We're about to finish our full long-term review of the OnePlus N100. So be sure to be subscribed to the Tech Travel Geeks there if you want to see that video pop up in your notifications. Make sure to have that bell dinged as well. So the cameras are a mixed bag. The POCO X3 is a superior device. What about selfies? We saw the dotches on the screen earlier. So on the POCO X3 NFC, you have a dotch, which in this case is a 20 megapixel sensor. It takes decent shots. Whereas the dotch on the OnePlus N100 is a simple 8 megapixel one. It's not really as capable. Both selfie cameras record full high definition video, but if you don't have good lighting, they're both pretty mediocre. Okay then, so we've covered cameras, screen, hardware. Let's talk about and memory and storage. Let's talk about the key thing that makes a smartphone a powerful computer. It's chipset. So the OnePlus N100 is running a Qualcomm Snapdragon chipset. As far as brands go, that's the same as what's on the POCO X3 NFC. So they're both running Qualcomm Snapdragon chipsets. The difference is the category. One is a whole category above the OnePlus N100. That's the POCO X3 NFC. So the OnePlus N100 is running a Snapdragon 460 chipset. That means it's a 4 series Snapdragon chipset. It's an older design, older technology. It's built on the 11 nanometer technology. It's not as power efficient per cycle, and it has a less powerful graphics processing unit. That's what makes what's on the screen look good, and especially for games makes a very big difference. Whereas the POCO X3 NFC is a whole 3 categories above that. It's running a Qualcomm Snapdragon 7 series chipset, specifically the 732G, which in 2020 was an 8 nanometer chipset. That means it's much smaller, it wastes less heat, and it's much more efficient and faster. It also has a more powerful graphics chipset. So gaming, for example, playing Call of Duty or playing PUBG will be a much better experience on the POCO X3 NFC, as we saw in a few of our past videos and as we discussed in the full long-term review. We'll be covering gaming on the OnePlus N100 as well, but overall I have to say that the overall performance of the POCO X3 NFC when it comes to intense computing tasks like photo editing, video editing and gaming is a whole category superior to the OnePlus N100. Right then, I think we've covered all elements. The overall package and the overall impressions are very, very clear. Unless Oxygen OS and the OnePlus brand and experience is what you're after, I can't recommend the OnePlus Nord N100. In 2021, which is when we're publishing this video and when we're making the consideration, the OnePlus Nord N100 under-delivers, especially when compared to the POCO X3 NFC. And even if you can't get the POCO X3 NFC on offer when it is less expensive and more or less the same price as the OnePlus Nord N100, I can thoroughly recommend the POCO X3 NFC and would say stay away from that OnePlus Nord N100. Both great smartphones, they may suit your needs, but be very aware that that less powerful chipset on the OnePlus Nord N100 and lack of NFC limits on how much and where and how you use your smartphone compared to the POCO X3 NFC, which is the full package. It is delivering a lot more value than the just around about £200 price it's sold at. We'll have links in the description to all our other videos on these two devices. We'll also pop a couple of links to where you can purchase these devices on Amazon. If you don't already, please do subscribe to the Tech Travel Geeks here on YouTube, where we will be continuing our coverage of devices that make the travel experience better, and more specifically, mobile devices. At the moment, we have a lot of them to review, a lot of them to cover, so we'll be releasing a lot more content about them. So, thanks for watching, and goodbye for us.